I'm Rachel Hayes, 34 years old, and the night my parents turned their backs on me, it was raining so hard, it felt like the sky was punishing me too. I was standing on their porch, soaked to the skin, holding my 5-month-old twin daughters in my arms, and asking for one night of shelter. My father stared at me like I was a stranger. My mother wouldn't even meet my eyes, and then the door closed without a word. Not a goodbye, not even a pause, just the sound of the latch sliding into place. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And tap that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to start over with nothing but your own 2 hands. I grew up in a quiet town just outside Spokane, Washington, a place where neighbors waved from their porches, and the church bulletin was more important than the local news. My parents, Mark and Diane, were the kind of people everyone respected. They volunteered on Sundays, hosted potlucks in our backyard, and raised me with a deep sense of duty, obedience, appearances. I was their only child, and for most of my life I tried hard to fit the mold they built for me. I earned good grades, kept my room spotless, joined choir, and never spoke out of turn. When I married Brandon at 27, it was with their full blessing. He had a solid job in real estate, came from a church-going family, and knew how to charm them with firm handshakes and yes sirs. But charm doesn't last when the curtain falls. By year 4 of our marriage, I'd learned how quiet cruelty could be. Brandon's words chipped away at me in private, small, cold comments that never left a bruise, but always left a mark. I told no one, not my parents, not my coworkers, not even Leah, my college roommate, who now worked nights as a nurse in Tacoma. I stayed silent until I couldn't. When I finally left him, my parents treated it like I'd walked away from the Lord himself. Divorce to them wasn't just failure, it was shame. And shame doesn't belong in a family that prides itself on being perfect. That's how I ended up on their porch that night holding Isla and Rory, soaked and trembling. I hadn't even planned to stay long, just needed to grab the diaper bag I'd left inside earlier, maybe rest for a few hours before figuring out our next move. I didn't expect a warm welcome, but I didn't expect the door to close either. I had nothing with me except my phone dying at 6%, and the babies bundled in damp blankets that clung to their cheeks. The streets were quiet. Not a single porch light on not one curtain pulled back. I scrolled through my contacts, thumb freezing from the cold. Most of the names belonged to Brandon's circle people who'd either taken his side or never asked for mine. I hovered over Leah's name, unsure if she'd even want to hear from me after all this time, but I tapped it anyway. And when she picked up, groggy and confused, all I could say was, "I don't know where to go." She didn't hesitate. "Text me your location. I'll be there in an hour." That's how it began. Not with a rescue, but with a friend showing up in the middle of the night with an old blanket and open arms. I didn't know then how far the road ahead would stretch. I didn't know about the writing or the letters or the lawsuit that would drag every secret into the light. All I knew was that someone opened a door, and I stepped inside. Leah's apartment was just under 700 square feet, but the moment we stepped inside, it felt like I'd crossed into another world. The warm air hit my skin and made me realize just how cold I'd been. The girls were quiet in my arms, worn out from the storm, their cheeks pink and damp, little fists curled close to their chests. Leah helped me out of my soaked coat without saying much, just handed me a towel and said softly, "Sit down. I'll grab something dry for the babies." I sat on her gray couch, sinking into it like it might hold me up for more than just the night. My legs ached. My arms were numb from holding the girls so long without rest. I laid them down gently across my lap as Leah returned with 2 baby onesies, a little big but clean and warm. "They were my nieces," she said, crouching down beside me. "You'd be surprised what I hang on to." I tried to thank her, but the words wouldn't come out. I just nodded and looked away, focusing on unbuttoning the baby's damp clothes. She helped with quiet hands, no fuss, no questions. The kettle started hissing in the kitchen as she stepped away. I pulled Isla close first, then Rory, wrapping them in dry cotton and whispering their names like a prayer. They'd fallen asleep on the ride over, and even now their tiny faces looked peaceful. When Leah returned with tea, she didn't hand it to me right away. Instead, she sat beside me, reached out, and gently took the girls into her lap, letting me breathe for the first time all evening. "Go take a shower," she said. "I'll sit with them." I stood under the hot water until the steam filled the small bathroom. I didn't cry right away. It took a few minutes for the heat to loosen everything inside me. But once it did, the tears came fast, harder than I expected. I pressed my palms against the tile and let it happen, feeling something break loose that had been building for months. By the time I stepped back out, wrapped in one of Leah's oversized shirts, the apartment was quiet. She'd cleared a little space in the living room, made up a sleeping area with 2 couch cushions, a folded blanket, and a laundry basket lined with towels for the girls. A mug of chamomile tea waited on the end table. "You don't have to talk right now," she said from the doorway. "Just rest." I lowered myself to the floor, pulled the girls close, and laid back slowly. Their soft breaths filled the room, steady and small. I stared up at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the faint hum of Leah's fridge and the occasional creak from the upstairs neighbor's steps. Eventually I whispered, "Leah, I don't know how long I'll need to stay." "You'll stay as long as you need," she said. "No one should be out in the rain with babies. Not you." I didn't answer, just pulled the blanket up and turned toward the girls, one hand resting on their bellies. My eyes stayed open most of the night. Not from fear, not from planning. I just didn't know what came next. I wasn't ready to think past the next diaper change or bottle or minute. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Isla's little cough and the faint strips of sunlight coming through the blinds. My body ached, and the floor hadn't done my back any favors, but for the first time in days, I felt the smallest trace of calm. Leah had already left for her shift. Her folded scrubs gone from the chair, but a sticky note was taped to the fridge. "You've got this. Oatmeal's in the pot. Coffee's on. Call if you need anything." The diaper bag Leah had picked up the night before sat by the door, neatly filled with formula wipes, a couple of pacifiers. It was more than I'd had when I'd knocked on my parents' door. The hours passed slowly that day. I didn't go anywhere. Didn't even turn on the TV. I cleaned what I could, dishes, counters, the bathroom sink. I folded a load of towels I knew weren't mine. When the girls napped, I sat beside them with a notebook Leah had left on the coffee table. Just a blank journal she'd grabbed from a thrift store bin. I wrote for the first time in months, not for an editor, not for a paycheck, just for myself. I wrote about the porch, the door, the rain. I wrote about Rory's little hand reaching out through her blanket and how tightly Isla had clung to my shirt. I didn't think about what I'd do with those words. I just needed to get them out. At night, I didn't sleep much. The twins took turns crying, teething gas restlessness. I rocked them in shifts, pacing the floor until my feet felt heavy. The days turned into weeks. I scrolled job listings when I had the energy, but my name was still on the lease of the apartment Brandon now shared with someone new. My credit was wrecked. Legal help felt out of reach, and every time I thought about chasing him down for child support, my stomach turned. So I did what I could. I stayed quiet. I stayed low. I tried not to be a burden. Then one night, Leah came home and found me sitting in the dark Isla, asleep on my chest, the TV on, but muted. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then walked over and handed me a flyer. "Writing workshop," she said. "Free. Local library. Saturdays. I thought of you." I looked down at the flyer. A plain sheet of paper with a bold line across the top. Your story matters. You used to be fire, Leah said. I think it's still in there. After she went to bed, I held on to that flyer for a long time. Not hope, exactly, but something. The next Saturday, I stood outside the library doors clutching the stroller. My hands trembled a little. I hadn't been in a room of strangers since before the girls were born. Since before everything. Inside, a small group of chairs waited in a circle. A whiteboard read, "Let's begin." I took a breath and stepped in. The library was just 3 blocks from Leah's apartment. I walked there slowly, pushing the stroller with Isla and Rory bundled inside, both asleep beneath a soft blue blanket. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind that carried the edge of fall even though summer wasn't quite gone. My palms felt clammy on the handle. Every step closer made my chest tighten a little more. The front doors slid open automatically. Inside, everything was quiet except for the soft beeping at the checkout desk and the shuffle of feet on the carpet. I followed the signs to the back where the workshop was being held. The community room was small, just a dozen chairs arranged in a circle, a folding table along the wall with a coffee pot and paper cups. A handwritten sign on the whiteboard read, "Your story matters. Let's begin." The instructor was a woman in her 50s, short gray curls and warm brown eyes that didn't linger too long, but still made you feel noticed. Her name was Joy. She smiled at me when I wheeled the stroller in and motioned to a seat near the back. "You're right on time," she said quietly. "Make yourself comfortable." The room filled slowly. A few women nodded to me as they passed. One offered a little smile when she saw the twins. No one asked questions. No one stared. It felt like a relief I hadn't expected. Joy started the session with a soft tone, her voice just above a whisper. "We're not here to write perfectly. We're here to write truthfully. So let's begin with this write about a moment that changed everything." She passed around index cards with the prompt printed on them, though I didn't need it. I already knew what I was going to write. I pulled a pen from my bag and opened the small notebook Leah had given me. My hands shook a little, not from nerves exactly, but from everything I'd been carrying. Then I lowered my head and wrote. The words came fast. I didn't pause to think about grammar or spelling. I just poured it out. The porch, the sound of the rain on the roof, my father's silence, my mother's turn back, Isla's whimper, Rory's little fingers gripping my coat. The moment the door shut and the world split open. When Joy asked if anyone wanted to read aloud, there was a quiet shuffle. For a minute, no one moved. Then, without really thinking, I heard my own voice say, "I'll go." I didn't look up as I read. I kept my eyes on the page, my voice uneven at first, but steadying with each sentence. When I finished, the room was still. Then a voice across the circle spoke barely more than a whisper. "That hit hard," she said. "I've felt that kind of shut door before." A few others nodded quiet murmurs of understanding. It wasn't applause or sympathy. It was something else. Recognition. I hadn't expected to feel that in a room full of strangers. After the session, Joy came over as I was packing up the stroller. "You've got something," she said gently. "Not just writing talent. A voice people need to hear." I thanked her, not sure what else to say. On the walk home, the streets looked the same, but I felt slightly different. Lighter, somehow. That night, after the girls were asleep, I opened Leah's old laptop and started typing what I'd written. A few pages at first, then another. I didn't have a clear plan, but the words kept coming. I typed late into the night, stopping only when Rory stirred and needed her bottle. The next morning I told Leah about the workshop. She smiled and said I knew it would help. When I mentioned that I'd typed some of it up, she asked to read a page or two. I hesitated, then handed her the laptop. She read in silence, her eyes moving slowly across the screen. When she looked up, her voice was firm. "You need to share this. At least one chapter. Just post it somewhere." I wasn't sure. The idea of putting it out there made my stomach flip. But Leah offered to help me set up a simple blog. She picked the name Left in the Rain. I posted the first piece that afternoon. I expected maybe a few clicks, maybe a comment or two from someone halfway across the world. I didn't expect what came next. By the following morning, the post had over 2,000 views. By the end of the week, it had reached nearly 180,000. But it wasn't the numbers that stopped me in my tracks. It was the comments. My father did the same when I left my marriage. I cried reading this. I was that girl on the porch once, too. Thank you for putting it into words. Each message felt like a thread tying me to someone I'd never met. The story wasn't just mine anymore. A week later, I received an email from a journalist at a small online magazine. She'd read the blog and wanted to interview me. I hesitated at first. I wasn't looking for attention, but I wasn't hiding anymore either. We talked by phone. She asked thoughtful questions, let me tell the story in my own way. When the article came out, it was titled, "Left in the Rain, One Mother's Journey from Rejection to Resilience." It started to spread even more. A parenting podcast reached out. Then a single mom Instagram page reposted an excerpt with the caption, "Read this." Then call the woman who raised you. No one should be left in the storm. I started receiving dozens of emails a day. Former classmates, readers from across the country. One message simply said, "You reminded me I'm not invisible." Then came the email from a literary agent. She'd read the blog, then the article. Her message was short. "Have you considered turning this into a book?" I stared at the screen. I read the message 3 times before calling Leah. She didn't let me finish reading it aloud before she said, Yes, Nat. That's what you've been doing all along." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure if I was ready. But a seed had been planted. The email from the literary agent stayed in my inbox for 2 days before I opened it again. The first time I'd read it, my breath had caught halfway through. I wasn't sure if it was fear or disbelief, but something kept me from responding right away. I kept reading the same line over and over. "Have you considered turning this into a book?" I didn't have a clean answer. I hadn't set out to write one. I just needed somewhere to put everything that had happened. But I started noticing something when I read through the blog posts again. Each one had a beginning, a middle, and some kind of end, even if it was open-ended. Leah said it best, "You already wrote it. Now you just have to put it together." I wrote back on a Wednesday morning. The girls were napping the apartment quiet, except for the soft rattle of the laundry in the dryer. I kept the message short, just said I was open to talking. The reply came an hour later, with a time for a phone call that Friday. We spoke for almost 45 minutes. Her name was Denise. She didn't talk in a rush or make big promises. She just asked thoughtful questions about the night on the porch, the writing workshop, the blog. She said the story wasn't just about being left behind. It was about what came after. After we hung up, I sat by the window watching leaves tumble across the sidewalk. The girls were still asleep. I picked up my notebook and started laying out the structure pieces of blog posts, rough entries, short paragraphs from my laptop. It was the same story, but now I was looking at it differently, as something I could shape. In the days that followed, I worked in small stretches during nap time late at night, in the quiet minutes after bottles and before baths. Leah helped me organize chapters. I pulled quotes from my journal, rewrote certain parts, clarified others. It felt strange at first editing moments I had lived through, but it also gave me a sense of direction I hadn't felt in a long time. When the manuscript was done, I sent it to Denise. A week later, she called with news. A small independent publisher was interested, run by women, focused on memoir and stories of resilience. They wanted to make an offer. The contract arrived by email that Thursday. It wasn't flashy, no advance to speak of, but it was real. I printed it out and read every line. The name at the top caught my eye, Left in the Rain by Rachel Hayes. It didn't feel heavy, it felt finished. I waited until Leah got home from her shift before signing it. The girls were already in their pajamas, curled up on a blanket in front of the TV. I sat at the kitchen table while Leah poured 2 mugs of tea. "You sure?" she asked. I nodded and clicked the mouse. The page refreshed. The signature confirmed. I leaned back in my chair, both hands resting on the table. Leah smiled and raised her mug slightly. "You did it." In the weeks that followed, I worked closely with their editor, revising trimming, adding small reflections between chapters. We chose a cover, a black umbrella resting in a puddle beneath a gray sky. I wrote the dedication on a quiet morning while Isla played with blocks on the floor and Rory napped in her swing. I kept it simple to the daughters born into storms. May you find your shelter within. The official announcement came out on the publisher's website in early spring. They posted it on Instagram too, a photo of the cover, a short caption, and a link for pre-orders. Friends from the writing group shared it. The blog saw another wave of traffic. Comments came in from people I'd never met but who seemed to know the story already. 2 days later, an envelope appeared in the mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting right away. It was clean and precise the way it had always been my mother's. I brought it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it for a while before opening it. The letter was 2 pages typed. There was no greeting, just a straight line into her message. She called the book disgraceful, said I had shamed the family, embarrassed the church, hurt their reputation. She demanded the manuscript be withdrawn and threatened legal action if I refused. There was no mention of that night on the porch, no recognition of Isla or Rory, no apology. I folded the letter and set it back on the counter without a word. When Leah got home and read it, her expression didn't change. She picked up the envelope, turned it over in her hands, and said softly, "You knew this might come." "I did," I said, "but it still hurts." 3 days later, a second letter arrived, this one from a law office. A cease and desist notice. Claims of defamation, slander, emotional harm. I read it once, then again, trying to make sense of the words. I had told the truth. I had written what happened. The publisher called within the hour. Their legal team had seen this before, women writing about family rejection, especially when religion and image were involved. They told me not to panic. They were prepared. We started gathering documentation, text messages, emails, Leah's photos from the night I arrived, soaked and trembling on her front step. I still had the voice recording from the phone call I made to my mother the next morning, when I'd asked her why her answer had been flat. "We can't be associated with failure. That's not who we are." That audio would soon be played in a courtroom. The lawsuit became public not long after. A local journalist picked up the story. The headline read, "Parents Sue Daughter for Memoir About Being Left in the Rain." It spread quickly. People weren't just interested in the drama, they recognized the pattern. Comments poured in. Stories shared by other daughters, sons, partners, friends, anyone who had been pushed aside to protect a family image. Hashtags began trending. Pre-orders jumped. My inbox overflowed. And through it all, the case moved forward. In court, their attorney argued I had harmed their reputation, that I had twisted events, left out context, framed them unfairly. Our response was simple proof, witness testimony, and my own words. The judge listened. To the recording, to Leah's statement, to the blog, to the photos. When the verdict came down, it was clear. This book is protected speech, rooted in lived experience. Case dismissed. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat quietly next to Leah, holding the court document in one hand and Isla's stuffed bunny in the other. Outside the courthouse, the air felt colder than I expected. Not sharp, just still. The courthouse emptied slowly after the ruling. Leah and I walked out without saying much. The rain had started again, soft and steady. We paused at the curb while she buckled the girls into their car seats. I held the rolled-up court document in one hand, still warm from where I'd gripped it during the hearing. That night, once the girls were in bed and the apartment had gone quiet, I opened the blog again. I didn't know what I was going to post. There was no clear update to give no neat conclusion. So I wrote what I had, a few plain sentences about the hearing the judgment and a thank you to everyone who had followed along since the first chapter. I hit publish and closed the laptop. By morning, my inbox had tripled in size. People weren't just reading the posts anymore. They were telling their own stories. Some wrote about family silence, others about divorce addiction, estrangement. A teacher from Illinois shared that she'd been afraid to come out to her parents. A father in Oregon said his daughter hadn't spoken to him in years, and he finally understood why. Each message came from a different life, but the rhythm was the same. Someone had been shut out, and someone else was just now hearing the knock. A few days later, Leah and I took the girls to a nearby park. The sun was out. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and sunscreen. Rory had fallen asleep in her stroller, but Isla was wide-eyed, kicking her legs against the tray. We were halfway down the path when a woman walking the opposite direction slowed in front of us, holding something to her chest. "Are you?" she asked, voice uncertain. I glanced at Leah, then nodded. She held up the copy of Left in the Rain that she'd been carrying. Her fingers trembled slightly. "My daughter left an abusive marriage last fall," she said. "I told her she was embarrassing us. I didn't get it. Then I read your book. I called her the next day. I told her I was wrong." She stepped forward and hugged me. Just a moment, gentle and brief. Then she nodded at the twins, turned, and walked on. That was the first time I realized the book wasn't just being read. It was being passed from hand to hand. In the following weeks, my editor sent updates. Pre-orders were higher than expected. An audiobook deal was offered. A small book club in Michigan asked if I'd do a virtual visit. The podcast that had interviewed me early on asked for a follow-up. But the biggest change came quietly. A message request showed up on Facebook. The name was familiar in a distant way. My Aunt Clara, my mother's younger sister. She was never the loud one at family events. Always stayed near the edge of things, smiling but reserved. Her message was short. "Rachel, I read the book. I believe you. I'm sorry I didn't say anything back then. I see it now. I'm proud of you." That was it. No questions, no justifications. Just words I hadn't known I needed until I read them. Other messages followed. A few former neighbors, an old classmate from high school, my freshman year English teacher who remembered I'd loved writing. Most just said thank you. Some shared their own stories. One woman wrote that she'd printed out an excerpt from the blog and taped it inside her kitchen cabinet, said she read it every morning to remind herself that leaving wasn't failure. With the case over and the book out in the world, the pace of my days didn't change much. The twins still kept me busy. Feedings, diaper changes, naps that never seemed to last long enough. But at night, after their breathing slowed and the apartment fell still, I started writing again. Not about the past, not about what I'd lost, but about what came after. It was Leah who encouraged me to make it something more. "You have more to say," she told me one night while folding baby socks. Not about them, about how you kept going. So, I started working on a second book. Not a sequel exactly. More like a collection of reflections, small pieces about rebuilding loneliness and finding calm after the storm. I called it The Quiet Revolution Letters from the Porch. There were no dramatic plot points, just short entries. One was about the first time Rory clapped her hands, another about learning to fix the broken drawer in Leah's kitchen. One was a letter I wrote but never sent to my mother. The manuscript was shorter than the first, but steady. My publisher supported it. We chose a simple cover, the kind that wouldn't draw too much attention on a shelf, but still had weight. It didn't go viral, no headlines, no lawsuits, but copies ended up in unexpected places. School counselors, therapists' offices, a few church book clubs, which surprised me. That was enough. I turned down most interviews after that. Not out of fear, just because I didn't need to explain the story anymore. I had lived it. I had told it. That was enough, too. The morning settled into a rhythm, cereal bowls, sticky fingers, cartoons humming in the background. The afternoons were long walks, library visits, neighborhood sprinklers. The evenings were quiet again. I'd sit on the porch with tea, listening to the wind. Sometimes it rained, soft, steady, almost familiar. And every now and then someone new would find the book. Someone with their own storm, their own porch, their own silence to break. The day the book was officially released, I didn't do anything special. I changed diapers, folded laundry, took the girls to the grocery store. The only sign that anything was different was the email from my publisher confirming that orders were shipping. They included a copy of the announcement post they'd shared, just the cover, a short caption, and a link to purchase. That evening, I watched Isla roll over on her playmat while Rory sat in her bouncer batting at the dangling toys. Leah came home with a bottle of sparkling apple cider and 2 paper cups. We toasted on the couch, both of us tired, both of us smiling. I still wasn't sure what it meant to have a book out in the world, but I knew it mattered. 2 days later, the letter came. It was in a plain white envelope with no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It had been steady for as long as I could remember. Holiday cards, school permission slips, grocery lists on the fridge. I slid it open and unfolded 2 neatly typed pages. My mother didn't mince words. She called the book disgraceful, said I had embarrassed the family. She accused me of exaggerating, of twisting the truth, of dragging private matters into the public eye. She demanded that I withdraw the book immediately or face legal consequences. There was no acknowledgement of what had happened that night, no mention of the girls, just instructions, just shame. I left the letter on the kitchen counter. When Leah read it later, her jaw clenched. She didn't say much, just looked at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded, though I didn't feel anything clear. Not anger, not fear, just a dull pressure in my chest that stayed there for hours. The legal notice arrived next. This one from an actual law firm, a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation slander and causing emotional harm. The words were sharp and formal. I sat at the table after reading it, staring at the wall while Rory babbled to herself in the next room. I called the publisher that afternoon. Their legal team had expected this. They told me to hold tight, that they'd walk me through every step. They weren't backing down. They reminded me that I had documentation witnesses, messages, recordings. So we started gathering everything. Leah pulled out her old phone, where she'd saved the photos from that first night, me standing on her porch, soaked through, holding both girls. I found the text I'd sent asking her to come, the voicemail I'd saved from the following morning when I'd called my mother to ask why. Her answer had been brief. "We can't be associated with failure. That's not who we are." That recording became a central part of our defense. Word of the lawsuit spread quickly once it hit local media. A journalist who'd covered family estrangement stories picked it up. The headline read, "Parents Sue Daughter Over Memoir Detailing Her Abandonment." It didn't take long for social media to catch on. People began sharing their own stories in the comments. Stories of being disowned, of being erased to protect a reputation. Hashtags started to circulate, #left in the rain, @not your shame. Messages flooded my inbox again, not just with support, but with testimony. I watched it all quietly. I kept showing up for the girls. I cooked, I cleaned, I wrote short notes for the second manuscript. At night, I stood in the doorway of their room, listening to them breathe. In court, their attorney argued that I had misrepresented them, cost them social standing, damaged their place in the community. Our legal team responded with photos, texts, and recordings. Leah testified. The editor testified. I was called to the stand as well. I didn't embellish anything. I answered what was asked. When they played the recording of my mother's voice, the courtroom was still. The ruling came quickly. The judge stated clearly that the book was not defamatory. It was protected speech memoir based on lived experience. The case was dismissed. Leah and I stood together in the hallway afterward. The building emptied around us. I held the official ruling in one hand and Isla's stuffed bunny in the other. My legs felt unsteady. I kept taking slow breaths. "I can finally exhale," I said softly. We left through a side door. The sky was overcast. A few drops of rain fell on the windshield as we pulled out of the parking lot. Rory was already asleep in her car seat. Isla stared out the window, quiet and still. The news broke that evening. The dismissal made headlines. It was picked up by a national outlet. The headline this time was simple: "Judge rules in favor of author, sued by parents over memoir." I didn't read most of the articles, but I noticed a shift online. People weren't just following the story, they were adding to it, sharing pieces of their own, writing about therapy, writing about reconciliation, writing about letting go. One comment stayed with me. It said, "Her parents didn't sue her. They sued their own reflection." I read that twice, then a third time. I knew what it meant. The book hadn't shown anything that wasn't already there. It had simply made it visible. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with Leah while the girls played on the rug behind us. The window was open a few inches. A breeze moved through the curtains. I opened my laptop and looked at the manuscript for the second book. The cursor blinked at the end of the last paragraph I'd typed weeks ago. I started writing again. In the days after the ruling, the silence inside the apartment felt different. Not empty, just settled, like something heavy had been placed down finally and wasn't being picked up again. I moved through each morning the same as before, changing the girls, making oatmeal, wiping crayon off the kitchen wall. But outside those walls, the story kept echoing. Social media had picked it up again. The posts weren't just about the court case anymore. They were about what the book had stirred up. Women tagging their sisters, grown children writing to each other in public comments. One man shared a photo of his childhood home, captioned simply, "This book helped me understand why I never went back." The messages didn't slow. They multiplied. Some were short, just a thank you or a sentence about feeling seen. Others were long. Stories about rejection, shame, silence. Some included photos, porch steps, hospital waiting rooms, suitcases packed in the corner of bedrooms. Leah helped me respond when I couldn't keep up. I didn't try to fix anything. I just wrote back what I would have needed to hear. "You're not alone." One afternoon, we were walking the twins through the park when a woman in her 50s approached. She wore a denim jacket and carried a paperback copy of Left in the Rain. Her eyes were glassy as she stepped toward us. "Are you?" she asked, holding the book close to her chest. I nodded. "My daughter left her husband last year," she said. "He wasn't kind, but I told her to go back. I told her marriage was forever." Then I read this. "I called her last week. I told her I was sorry. She reached out and hugged me before I could say a word. Then she turned and walked away." I stood still for a moment, watching her go. Isla tugged on the edge of the stroller tray, trying to reach the bottle she'd dropped. Rory was already asleep, her thumb pressed against her cheek. That night, after the girls went down, I opened my inbox. There was a message request from a name I hadn't seen in years, Aunt Clara. She had always been quiet. At family gatherings, she stayed in the background. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice, but she noticed everything. Her message was short, just a few lines. "Rachel, I read your book. I believe every word. I'm sorry I didn't speak up back then. I'm proud of you now." I sat with the message open for a long time, rereading it until the screen dimmed. More messages followed. A neighbor from my childhood street, a Sunday school teacher, a woman who used to carpool with my mother. Not everyone was supportive, but enough were. Enough to feel like the silence that had once covered everything was starting to thin. The publisher reached out a few weeks later to say that Left in the Rain had reached a milestone in sales. They were planning a second printing. Book clubs were requesting bulk orders. Counselors were requesting copies for waiting rooms. I didn't do a press tour. I didn't make any big announcements. But the story had taken on a shape of its own. A quiet one, steady and real. The second book, The Quiet Revolution, had started moving too. It didn't spread the same way. It wasn't viral, but it landed where it needed to. A social worker in Arizona emailed to say she'd been reading it between appointments. A high school guidance counselor in New Jersey said her students were passing around copies after school. At home, not much changed. The girls started standing with support. Rory liked holding on to the edge of the couch and laughing at her own wobble. Isla had taken to crawling straight toward anything she wasn't supposed to touch. The living room was scattered with toys, plastic cups, and a few board books that had been chewed at the corners. One morning, Leah handed me a set of keys. "They're yours," she said, smiling, "and so is the place." I blinked at her, confused. "I mean it," she said. "We found something." She took me across town to a small bungalow just over the river. It had peeling white paint, a crooked mailbox, and a narrow porch with room for one rocking chair. The front yard was patchy but bright with weeds that looked like wildflowers. The real estate agent waited by the front steps. "It's not fancy," Leah said, "but it's yours. No shared walls. No one else's rules." Inside, the floors creaked and the kitchen was small, but there were 2 bedrooms, one for me, one for the girls. We moved in 3 weeks later. I painted the nursery lavender and added soft cloud shapes to the ceiling with a sponge and a bowl of white paint. We hung the girls' art on the fridge, finger-painted suns and crooked hearts. I built a bookshelf by hand. Leah helped me hang pictures above it. One wall in the living room held framed covers of both books. Another held a photo Leah had taken of me and the girls standing in a field of sunflowers, the wind catching my hair. I wasn't wearing makeup. The caption written beneath it read, "Not perfect, just free." Most nights now I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the street lamp flicker at the corner. The wind moved softly through the leaves. Some nights it rained, not heavy, just a quiet tapping on the roof. I didn't flinch anymore when I heard it. That season of silence, of storm, of doors closed and words unsaid, it wasn't gone. But it didn't own me either. The porch became my favorite place in the house. In the mornings I'd sit there with a cup of coffee while the girls played just inside their laughter, rising and falling like background music. In the evenings, I'd bring out a blanket and listen to the wind move through the trees. Sometimes Leah would join me, sometimes not. But even in the quiet, I never felt alone. The house was small, but every corner held something we'd made. Daisies bloomed in the front yard, messy, bright, stubborn little things we planted together one Saturday morning. Inside the girls' bedroom was covered in their fingerprints, painted clouds above their cribs. The bookshelf I'd built held more than just copies of Left in the Rain. It held picture books, toddler puzzles, a few paperbacks Leah had passed down. And above it still framed that photo of the 3 of us in the sunflower field, wind in my hair, both girls in my arms. I didn't look polished. I looked real. We settled into a rhythm that didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like living. Grocery runs with sticky fingers wrapped around mine. Library visits where Rory always tried to sneak extra books into the bag. Isla pointing out the moon every night like it was brand new. Ordinary things, but they felt like hours. The second book was published quietly. It didn't make headlines or stir conversation online, but I'd see its title pop up in unexpected places: a counseling office flyer, a photo from a high school reading group, an email from a women's shelter that had ordered 10 copies for their residents. That was enough for me. I didn't need a spotlight. I had a life. One night after we read their favorite bedtime story twice in a row, Isla looked up at me and asked, "Mommy, where do rainbows come from?" I kissed the top of her head, smoothed back her hair, and whispered, "From storms that didn't win." She nodded like she already knew. Then she closed her eyes, and within minutes, both girls were asleep, soft and safe in their beds. I stepped out onto the porch and sat down with a cup of tea, the warm mug resting between my palms. The wind had picked up just enough to make the trees sway, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled low, not threatening just there. I used to think healing would come like a breakthrough, a clean break, but it didn't. It came slowly, in baby steps and small routines, in doors left open, in friends who stayed, in stories told out loud even when your voice shook. And now when I think about that night on the porch, the rain, the cold, the silence, I don't feel broken anymore. I feel steady. I feel whole. That version of me didn't disappear. She just led me here. If you've ever stood outside a door that wouldn't open, I hope you know this: your story matters, and it doesn't end in the rain. Thank you for listening to mine, and if this reached you in any way, feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Maybe tonight they're just waiting for a little light to come through.